Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, Comptroller. I'm here to present to you the Environmental Protection Division's proposed amendments to Chapter 15, Article 17 of the Fertilizer Management Ordinance. And I think it's really interesting. I'm looking at a picture of horses and, thinking about fertilizer while we're doing this. But so my presentation this morning, I'm going to give you a background of why we are here talking about the ordinance. Let you know about what our education efforts have been, the findings of our nitrate study, and we'll review the changes that we're proposing for the ordinance, talk about some of the stakeholder outreach that we've received so far, summarize it all, and then talk to you about our next steps. So this all began pretty much with our needing to have a fertilizer ordinance back in 2008. When the State Department of Environmental Protection put a total maximum daily load on the Aquifer River and Springs area. They identified that septic tanks and fertilizer were contributing the most nitrogen as, to the river for making sure that we had that nutrient number that was way too high, and told us we needed to get it lower. In 2010, we had a basin management action plan for Lake Jesup, Okeechobee in 2015. In 2016, the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act was passed by the state, and that required us to update our fertilizer ordinance to incorporate the new language that DEP had put forward, and we did do that. We passed that ordinance back in July of 2017. In 2018, we've got the Wakiwa and Rock Springs Basin Management Action Plan. So that's kind of the history of how we've been regulated by the state, which we're required to get our nutrient levels down in our water bodies. With the state, they did their study back in 2018, and they were able to show that 29% of our nitrogen is coming from septic tanks and 26% is coming from urban fertilizer. You can see in that graph that our cumulative impairments have been growing since 2002. So from 2001 to 2021, we've identified we have currently 154 total impairments, of which 61% are nutrient impairments. We've got about 104 water bodies that are showing nutrient impairments, or that are showing impairments, and 154 total spread out over those 104. So 17 of our water bodies have had total maximum daily loads placed on them by the state, and we have 5 basin management action plans that we're managing. We can see preventing the nutrients from going into our water bodies is definitely cheaper than trying to remediate them. So just to remove 1 pound of nitrogen from our water bodies can cost anywhere from $165 up to $10,000 per pound. So, our goal is to try to find ways to prevent it where we can. Just a history of our ordinance. In 2009, we adopted Chapter 15, Article 17, which is our Fertilizer Management Ordinance. And at that time, the ordinance that we passed did not have a ban on retailers being able to sell fertilizer. And I mention that because that's been one of the comments that we've received quite a bit from our stakeholders. But because we didn't put it in the 2009 ordinance, which we couldn't predict the future, of course, but in 2013, the Florida legislature preempted in 576.181 Florida statute. We are now no longer able to restrict fertilizer sales at retail establishments. So in 2015, DEP updated the state model ordinance, and so that made us have to go back and update our ordinance to be in compliance with the state model, and that's how we got to the 2017 ordinance, which we currently have and are operating under. At the time that we had the 2000 ordinance passed, the BCC directed the Environmental Protection Division to go forth and do a study to determine where the nitrate sources were coming from. And at the same time, we embarked on a big education campaign county-wide, and then we even got a little more grant money to focus on the Wakiwa Basin in particular to make sure that residents and the commercial applicators and businesses, everybody understood our ordinance, so that was our goal there. So we do have other ordinances in the county that are related to the fertilizer ordinance and also help us with the nutrient issues that we're addressing. So for instance, landscape ordinance in Chapter 24, water conservation in Chapter 37, and mass grading that's addressed in Chapter 16 and 38. So all these ordinances kind of work together to help try to address the nutrient pollution issue. So when we talk about education, part of it was we needed immediately to find, what's the best way to educate residents? Well, let's get some information at the point of sale where they're buying their fertilizer. So our ordinance says that retail establishments need to put a poster where they're selling the fertilizer that gives an overview of the ordinance. And I brought one here. You can see they're laminated because a lot of the garden centers are outdoors and they get, a lot of weather in there, so we wanted them to last. So we provide these. We know we have about 55 stores right now in the county that are selling fertilizer, and we give them a visit every year, and we make sure that they all have their posters displayed. We've also given about 766 decals out to commercial applicators. These have to be displayed on the vehicle that they're using to apply fertilizer. So if somebody's out putting down fertilizer and they've got the decal on their vehicle, that means that they've had the proper training that they need to have, and they have been trained on Orange County's ordinance. So we've also done all of this education that we can county-wide, but like I said, we also had a My Yard, My Springs campaign that was just for the Aquifer spring shed. We got grant money from the state to do that. And some of our calls to action with all of our education are mainly skip the nitrogen and phosphorus during the summertime. Make sure you don't put fertilizer down when it's about to rain. We made an online training course that residents could take, and we encourage them to go and learn about how to properly apply fertilizer. Use 65% slow-release nitrogen fertilizer. Don't ever use phosphorus, so that middle number always needs to be 0 unless you've got a soil test showing a deficiency. And ensure that the fertilizer that you're putting down doesn't go on concrete, because as soon as it rains, it's going to wash off into our storm drains. And that image that's there is kind of interesting because that's actually a magnet that we made, and we put on all the county vehicles of all the inspectors who are out and about, so that residents would maybe, even if they didn't want to know about the fertilizer ordinance, they might find out about it by sitting at a traffic light behind one of our vehicles. So we had a countywide Fertilize Responsibly initiative, and these are all the things that we've done. We've got a really nice website. We tried really hard, and even to integrating fertilizer awareness training in our Orange County 101 class that's a passport class, so that our own staff would know that there's an ordinance and can spread the word. And then these are some of the things we've done with the My Yard, My Springs campaign for the Aquifer area, and this has wrapped up, and we're kind of excited because now all of these materials that were developed for the marketing firm, we can now start using these countywide. So this is a few examples. If you want to draw your attention to the blue box, and it's got the big billboard up there that says Your Yard in Florida Springs. It was kind of a really neat campaign that sort of used different things to tie the message together, with things people do in their yard and how it will focus on the springs or impact our springs. So what we discovered during the Aquifer campaign is certain outreach worked better than others. So PSAs and social media and billboards, we estimate that the reach for those was much larger than traditional, like just having our website and social media ads and newsletters. So even though we did all those things, those are the things that we had really good success with. So this is a timeline of, we've tried to do quite a bit of surveying since the initial 2008, before we launched the very first ordinance, right up until fall of 2021. So So what we've seen is that the number of people using fertilizer is going down. The people who are using fertilizer during the restricted period has gone down. A lot more people are reporting that they've seen our campaign materials, and we've seen definitely growth in how many people are aware of our ordinance. So we're learning a lot from the education that we're doing, and we're talking now about what's our strategy for doing things even better in the future. We've got an enforcement component to our ordinance. Enforcement generally is based on people making complaints about things that they see, such as vegetative debris in storm drains, or out on impervious surfaces where they can, like maybe somebody's just cut all the grass and left all the grass in the road, the clippings. So 311 has been wonderful. A lot of the complaints are reported to us through 311, and we do follow up with sometimes a visit to the home, a letter to the commercial applicator. It's typically an education first. So, and now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Mitchell Katz to go through the study findings. Very good.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, fellow citizens. I'm Mitchell Katz. I'm with the Water Sciences section of the Natural Resources Management of EPD. As Jane mentioned, in 2007-2008, FDEP, in conjunction with St. Johns River, was out in the northwest portion of the county, and they had installed a bunch of wells, and they were looking at nitrate concentrations in this area. We came to the board in 2017, and at that time the board instructed us to look a little bit further at the sources in this area. To that end, the contractors for EPD were tasked to going out and revisiting those wells, and also installing some other wells in some other locations and at some deeper depths. And those findings that emerged out of that scope of work are captured in these three reports that are on the Fertilizer EPD website and the county website, and certainly you can contact EPD for copies of these reports. Well, this is the study area, and as I said, it's in the northwest portion of the county, and there you see that big green area there is the Aquifer Spring State Park, and you see a series of wells here. The green icons are the shallow wells. Those are primarily the wells that St. John's and DEP installed back in 2007, 2008. Those wells were installed in locations where there are no septic tanks. In other words, the residents are on sanitary service, and the residents do not have reclaimed water made available to them. We went back, DEP did, and we installed some wells of an intermediate depth, and those show up here in yellow. And then the deep wells, down deep, 150, 200 feet down the upper Florida Aquifer, those are portrayed here in blue. And groundwater flow direction, in general, is from the south to the north, and from the west to the east, and of course the water emerges at the spring. And this is just kind of a little box diagram to show you kind of the layer cake of the aquifers out there. Yellow would be the shallow aquifer where our shallow wells are. The orange is where the intermediate wells are, and then the deep wells, 150, 200 feet, are down there in the gray area. So our consultants went and looked at about 25 locations, and they took samples out of those wells, sent it off to the lab, and the lab reported the nitrate concentrations back to us during the time period of 2017 to 2021. What you see here are the annual average of nitrate concentrations in those wells, and they're grouped by well depth. The wells portrayed here in green, those green columns are all from superficial groundwater wells. In the orange, from the wells of intermediate depth, and for the deeper wells, those are portrayed here in blue. I also want to point your attention to this horizontal dashed line on the bottom. That's actually the total maximum daily load adopted by the state of Florida for nitrate concentrations in the Aquifer Spring River system. and the numerical value of that is 0.286. Let me draw your attention now to MW4, which is about in the middle of the page there. That column is about, the concentration of nitrate in that well is about 50 times higher than the TMDL that Orange County is obligated to meet. So we have 25 locations here, and if you look, 17 of those 25 locations fail that TMDL test. You see the intermediate, we've got several wells there that are quite a bit higher than that TMDL red line. And even the deep groundwater well there, we had one that on average is constantly above, and that's at MWBU. I want to point out two other columns on here. All the way on the right-hand side is SW01. That's the annual concentration at the spring boil. They collect samples and sent those off to the lab as well. And all the way on the left, that BW2, that's a reference well we installed in the park. The concentration of nitrate's very low there. We installed that well, or actually St. John's installed that well, because there's no homes by, there's no fertilization going on. So it serves as a reference and kind of reflects on maybe what concentrations could be in these other wells. All right, moving along here, I'm going to zero in on MW7, which again is a shallow well that's installed in a residential area. That is, there's no septic system on site, and there is no reclaimed water for irrigation. What do we see here? Well, we went ahead and our contractors collected, through the 3-4 years, they collected groundwater samples, of course, and you're looking at the monthly average nitrate concentration in that well as portrayed by that orange line. Now, we go to Orlando International Airport and we download some rainfall data from OIA, and we get a couple years that are normal years, and we project the nitrate concentrations against that rainfall record. And what do we see? We see that as the rainfall increases, concentrations of nitrate in that well, MW7, increases. As rainfall decreases, we see in general a decrease in nitrate in that well, MW07. Now that's not strictly true, because if you scan over to the right, you'll see like in 12/2019, about halfway across the page there, we've got rainfall coming down, but nitrate concentrations are going up. That could be because the rainfall fell, the resident is irrigating using more rainwater, using more potable water for irrigation to keep that grass green. But the result's the same, whether it's rainfall or whether it's the irrigation, you're seeing that increase in nitrate in that well, MW7. And just to zoom out a little bit, these are all our shallow wells, and that green rectangle represents the proposed restricted summer window. And that's from June 1st to September 30th. And what you can see here is that if you look at each one of these lines going from left to right, many of them have a peak nitrate concentration within that window, within the time frame of that proposed restricted period. And even if you move down some of the wells that have lower concentrations of nitrate in there, they still have a peak nitrate during that time. And most of these wells, portrayed here in this figure, are still above that red line. Whether it's summer or whether it's fall or winter, year-round, they're above that line, indicating they failed that TMDL test. And we move deeper into the aquifer, we see the same thing. We see peaks in that proposed restricted area. And this is the deeper wells. These are the ones that down 150, 200 feet down in the upper Floridan. And in general, they don't necessarily, have a peak. They're kind of like the same concentration. But we do have wells that deep that show high nitrate concentrations, as you can see here by DEP PBD. And then the yellow line at the top, which is MWBU. And I just want to draw your attention now to this brown, almost horizontal line with the X's. That is the concentration at the spring boil, the concentration of nitrate. And year-round, it is above that TMDL. All right, so I'm going to talk about isotopes a little bit, and what we're talking about here is nitrate. And nitrate's made from nitrogen and oxygen. And depending how it's manufactured, or whether it's a natural source of nitrate, or whether bacteria have been eating the nitrate for respiration, you get different isotope signatures from that nitrate. And those different signatures can be used to trace the source. So in other words, a source of nitrate that's natural will have a different signature than a source that's from fertilizer or a source that's from septic waste. So what we did, in the samples that had nitrate, we took those samples and, we sent them off to a laboratory that runs these isotopic analysis to return the results. And that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing the plot of the isotopic signatures. If we look at our friend MW7 again, which is the green circle, that bright green circle, we see many of those signatures fall in this box that is labeled in the lower left-hand corner, labeled ammonium, NH4/urea fertilizer. That indicates the isotopic signature for those samples from that well suggests the source of that nitrate in that well is from fertilizer applied to turf grass. We see the same thing if you look at the black diamond, MW4/MW4R. Many of those isotopic signatures fall within that box that's labeled ammonia, urea fertilizer. Same thing with MW22, and so on down the line. Now, some of them don't fall within that box. However, they fall within generally a diagonal line leading from the lower left corner to the right-hand corner. And remember I said that bacteria can change the isotopic signature? There's a process called denitrification where bacteria will do just that. They'll enrich some isotopes and eat the other isotopes, and that's why you get that drift in that signature across the page from the lower left-hand corner to the upper right-hand corner. You may also ask, well, I see several of those results, those signatures fall within this box that say manure and wastewater. Well, that's a great question. And we had the same question. So what we did was we also took samples and we analyzed them for sucralose. Sucralose is an artificial sweetener that is in many drinks and many foods. But the human body cannot metabolize sucralose. So you pass the sucralose, and if the signatures were from manure and wastewater, we also would have gotten a signature from sucralose. So sucralose was not there. So by inference, those other signatures along that diagonal are from the denitrification and not from manure and wastewater or from reclaimed water. Because remember, the wells are sited at residences that are on our county water, and they don't have reclaimed water. All right, so we weren't satisfied with that. We wanted another line of evidence. And what we did is we took those signatures and we put them in a mixing model that, the mixing model, what that did for us was, okay, we got this concentration of nitrate, here's its signatures, it's in the well, what fraction of the signature we're seeing comes from what source? And we had about 4 different sources in this model, and we gave them all an equal chance. And what we saw here in this slide was that if we look at MW4 again, that horizontal bar in the middle of that purple rectangle, the model indicates about 66% of the nitrate we see in that well is due to ammonium/fertilizer being applied to turf grass. So this is like another line of evidence. And we have MW7 here. We look at MW7 and follow with our eye across the left from where that middle bar is in the square. That's about 58% of the signal, of the isotopic signal we're seeing in that well is due to fertilizer. And down the line here, the amount of nitrate you see in the well and the signature, it depends on where the well is located and what's happening, on the surface. Okay, so next, we asked ourselves, is the current ordinance protective of our groundwater resources? Excuse me. And, you know, further on downstream of our water bodies, because remember, nitrate is freely soluble. There's nothing to hang it up. Once the nitrate hits the groundwater, it's gone with that groundwater. It's going to move, and that groundwater comes up at the spring at the in Wakaiwa. Or if you're you know, a lakeshore resident, it comes up at the water body. It's just the hydrodynamics of the thing. So getting back to this here where we tested the current ordinance. The current ordinance allows a half a pound of totally soluble, 0% slow release nitrogen fertilizer per 1,000 square feet, or 1 pound of 50% slow release nitrogen fertilizer, or 1 pound of 65% slow release nitrogen fertilizer when that becomes available. So that's what the current ordinance says. We put this, those loading rates into a model called Hydrus. Hydrus is a software model that was developed by the United States Department of Agriculture, and it's used to help the agricultural community to time their feedings, to time their pesticides, to time their fertilization, that kind of thing. And we, once again, went to OIA, got the records for the rainfall, fed that into the model, and here's the results. Well, if you look at the most left-hand grouping of columns there, what do we see? This is for the 0% slow-release fertilizer. We put down that, that freely available nitrogen fertilizer. 45% of that fertilizer is predicted to be uptake by the roots, which is good. We want healthy plants. But over 50% of that load is available for leaching. Okay, so we're not going to put down slow release. Let's go to 50% slow release. What happens? Well, it improves a little bit. Just about 52% of the fertilizer is uptaken by plants, but still 40% is available for leaching. And then currently there's 65% in the stores. If somebody uses that to feed the turf grass, 53% of that, okay, well, it's improved, but still we're getting a quantitative amount of fertilizer that's available for leaching during irrigation and during rainfall. And then, of course, these little brown boxes there, that's the amount of the fertilizer that gets tied up in the soil. It wasn't available this time, but next time it may be available for the plant or available for the leaching. So we did all this work, and what did we find out? Well, just as DEP of St. John's found out, groundwater nitrate concentrations in the well network we looked at still remain above this 0.286 milligram TMDL for the Aquifer River system. We saw some well maybe 50 times higher. We found that the isotopic signatures, when we looked at those, they indicate that nitrogen fertilizer is a major source of nitrate detected in these wells. And that kind of confirms DEP's work, and that's kind of like a scientific principle. When you repeat someone else's work and you confirm their findings by a different method, you're probably onto something that's correct. Nitrate concentrations in monitoring wells appear to show peaks in the wet season, and you saw those peaks occurring in that green rectangle, which was the proposed blackout period. And the recommendation, the suggestion is that additional restrictions during the wet season may help with this groundwater leaching problem and protect our springs and our water bodies. So having said all that, I'm going to throw it back over here to Jane.
Thank you. That was good.
That was quite a bit, Dr. Katz.
Okay, so I'm back to just kind of go through the ordinance review and what we're proposing to change a little bit. So we're definitely going to update some definitions because we have a few definitions that we feel could be stated a little more clearly, and then we also added a definition for code enforcement officer and for institutional applicators. And an institutional applicator is basically someone who's employed by a company and does the fertilizer application, so they're not hired as a company to do it. Retail signage, we're just cleaning up that piece a little bit to say that the posters need to be placed at the point of distribution to consumers. Like, you can't have the fertilizer posters over by the bathroom. They need to be where the fertilizer is. We're proposing to increase our setback from surface water bodies from 15 feet to 25 feet. We're proposing to go ahead and lock in the 65% slow release nitrogen as our standard, because in our 2017 ordinance, it wasn't readily available for sale, but now it is. So we're just going to go with that, is what we're recommending. The exemptions, we've had exemptions for bona fide agricultural lands, parks, athletic fields, and golf courses. Now we want to add an exemption for people who have grazing land and maybe they don't have a bona fide ag exemption, but they are using their land for agricultural purposes, so, and also scientific research lands. We're proposing to change the golf course exemption a little bit to say they don't have just a blanket exemption, but we're proposing that they'll be exempt if they follow the state recommended best management practices for golf courses. And then we've always had the variance in there. I believe since 2009 with our first ordinance, we've had one variance requested and issued. But we've got a lot of stakeholder comments about getting rid of the variance. So we're talking to our county attorney's office about what's the best way to proceed with that. So that'll be addressed in our updated proposed ordinance that we'll roll out after this. The summer blackout period, we've always had a summer blackout period, but with the caveat that if you receive specific training, you can still apply fertilizer during that time that has nitrogen in it. So now we're proposing to go ahead and make it a hard blackout period from June 1st to September 30th, where we'll allow no nitrogen or phosphorus fertilizer during that time. We're proposing a new thing for a 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet per year annual cap on the amount of nitrogen that can be applied to a landscape. We're proposing to allow no fertilizer with nitrogen or phosphorus to be applied to freshly seeded or sodded landscapes. We're also proposing to reduce the rates of fertilizer that you would apply if you're in an area that gets reclaimed water. And we've been in discussions with utilities about how to create a calculator that would help people figure that amount out. As far as training goes, the proposal there, we want to clarify the training language because it is a little bit confusing in our current ordinance, and we're also adding a stipulation that institutional applicators get the same training that a commercial applicator would get. Enforcement in the current ordinance, we had a specific enforcement procedure written out in that, but with our new ordinance that we're proposing, so the ordinance of 2017, Chapter 11, which is our code enforcement procedures, didn't really apply. But in 2018, we updated Chapter 11, so that means that Chapter 11 now would apply to our fertilizer ordinance. So we're proposing that we follow Chapter 11 procedures. This is just a quick table that kind of compares what we're proposing with what other counties in our area are doing. You can see, Seminole County also has 65% slow release nitrogen. Martin County also has a 25-foot setback with water bodies. We in Monroe County are currently the only ones with a 2 pound per year per 1,000 square feet cap for nitrogen. So Monroe County has passed theirs. We're just proposing it. And then all of the counties that are on this list have a seeding or sodding restriction. And pretty much everybody has a rainy season restriction, and Miami-Dade's is actually a little bit longer than ours that we're proposing. So as far as stakeholder outreach, we've done an awful lot of stakeholder outreach. We've gotten a lot of input, which we love. We're so happy to hear people's comments and see what their concerns are. Environmental groups overall have asked us to adopt Seminole County's ordinance, make sure that we make the summer restriction a hard ban without any other exemptions, and they like the 65% slow release nitrogen. For agriculture, I'm sorry, I need to back up. This is what we were asked to do in 2017. Sorry about that. But and in 2017, we were asked to, by the agricultural community, non-bona fide grazing pastures should be exempt. We didn't exempt it at that time. We're proposing to exempt it this time. And we had support from industry and EPC with our changes. So for 2021, the stakeholder outreach that we've gotten so far, they want the summer blackout, they want the variance option removed for environmental groups. Industry is not supportive of our full summer blackout for nitrogen, and they want us to increase that annual cap from 2 pounds of nitrogen per year. So, and in general, most of the stakeholders have said that who want that increased, they would like it increased to 4 pounds of nitrogen per year. But we've had lots of engagement. Some of them have been, our public stakeholder meetings that we've held at the IFAS Extension Office. We've had meetings with our commissioners, the UF researchers, and even their head agronomist who's up in Jay, Florida. We met with the Agricultural Advisory Board, the Environmental Protection Commission, the Sustainability Advisory Board. We've been speaking with several of the municipalities, including City of Apopka. We've been talking to Seminole County. City of Orlando, as you saw this morning, they came out there in support of our ordinance as well. So in summary, we know that we've got our studies that are showing that we have nutrient levels, and you saw the slides. They are so high, we've got to do something. And this is just one of our tools in our toolbox, this ordinance. We're continuing to have nutrient impairments in our surface waters. They are increasing every year, it seems. And we have to remove these nutrients. The state requires it. So the proposed changes that we would like to, see go through with the fertilizer ordinance would be a summer blackout period and restricting the amount of fertilizer per 1,000 square feet on an annual basis to 2 pounds. So that's what we're proposing now. We do have, some next steps. We're continuing to engage our stakeholders. We're going to prepare a final ordinance for the board and the public hearing based on the direction that you give me today, and EPD will go forward with this. We're going to anticipate that we're going to adopt the new ordinance February of 2022. And once that happens, we'll have to reach out to our retail establishments, our commercial applicators, our large institutions that might have institutional applicators, and also our citizens to make sure everybody's aware of the new changes. So that's my presentation, and Mitchell and I are here to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you very much.
Well, all of our commissioners have indicated a desire to ask questions and make comments. Commissioner Wilson, we'll start with you.
I kind of want to just yell, yay! I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone at EPD that's worked on this. I know this has been such an intensive process. Dr. Katz, what a magician you are that you can take as much data as I know went into this and distill it down to something that is understandable for this liberal arts brain. It was, to me, such a, it's a difficult thing when we talk to people about how we can get to better results when you talk about environmental concerns. And the issue always comes back to the causal, and the cause and effect. And wow, what a overwhelming amount of evidence and coming at it from different angles. Thank you so much for all your work on this. I wanted to say also to the environmental advocates that came today, our partnerships with the city and other groups out there, thank you for hanging in there. I know this has been a long haul, and this is the work that will eventually probably save all of our lives, because ultimately without water we don't have anything. And I think just to raise a couple of things that I know the advocates really covered all of my points except for that one, a year ago, I don't know, this month still, the voters overwhelmingly decided to memorialize in our charter the importance of water. So anything that we do here to strengthen the protection is really a voter mandate. So I think that's an important thing to point out. I also think that knowing that right now we are seeing a catastrophic manatee death, I think living where we do sort of insular to what's happening in some of the lagoons, it all runs together. We are upstream in many instances. We are sharing water sources, and we're going to lose an iconic species without doing some really big major changes. And I think this one isn't a big major change. This is actually a very minor change. And so with that being said, I just wanted to find out, and this may be, I'm not sure who would be able to answer this. I'm very concerned about the variances and exemptions. I think that sometimes when you leave a door open for a loophole, that's all they need. And especially if the language says, substantial economic, that the variance would be allowed under the approval if there was substantial economic. What does that mean? And that sounds kind of wide open. And I think if you are applying something and getting paid monthly, you could probably evidence that there's going to be some economic hardship. But how do we balance that with the economic hardship we'll all face when our lakes are all dead?
Is that a question?
Yes, the language, economic hardship, it just sounds very vague to me, and I was wondering what is that standard?
All right, well, I see Georgiana is here, and she said she would answer the variance questions that came up, because it's more of a legal wording and where that it fits best in the ordinance.
Good morning. Georgiana Holmes from the County Attorney's Office. If I understand your question, you're asking, what is it?
Well, I mean,
As
so
an
looking at the
example of
language
it?
of the use of a variance, that the requirement would be to show a substantial economic hardship. But that doesn't give us an indication for, I mean, I can come to you today and say that because I am, no longer able to use the chemicals I've already purchased, that's going to cause me an economic hardship. What is that threshold?
So let me just take a step back a little bit and kind of explain a variance is an administrative construct. It's a procedure that's laid out in code that sets a standard. The ability to seek a variance is not created only in Orange County Code. It exists in state regulations. It exists in state law. So the inclusion of it in our code obviously doesn't touch other places where that right could exist. The language that's in our code tracks state language, and typically variances use that similar language that you see very similar words either in statutory provisions, rule provisions, or case law surrounding variances. There typically needs to be a demonstration of a substantial hardship. A lot of times you see buzzwords like undue hardship, undue burden, that it's not self-created. So the language that's in code tracks that. It is a standard that the burden is on the variance seeker. So the variance seeker needs to be able to put forth competent substantial evidence for the agency to make a determination that there is a substantial economic hardship or that the standard that's laid out in the procedure has been met in order to get the variance. So the inclusion or removal from our code doesn't touch state law. Including it in our code requires that demonstration be made to the county. So it requires a variance applicant to come to EPD and then come to the county.
I mean, so EPD's kind of the floor. I mean, not our EPD, Florida DEP is the floor for the language, right? So
No,
but you mean as far as the variance language?
no.
Okay, so explain again that you're saying that this is coming directly from, or that we're utilizing.
I explained the administrative concept of a variance, And so the administrative concept of a variance is where when you're promulgating a rule, or when you're making a rule, whatever agency is making a rule, they can also require or essentially mandate a procedure for a variance seeker to go through in order for that agency who created the rule to evaluate whether or not the procedure laid out in that rule is met in order to grant a variance. DEP does have a variance standard for some of their rules. FDACS has them. State law has them. The concept of a variance exists in Florida law. What the fertilizer ordinance does is it creates the standard for a variance applicant related to Chapter 15's fertilizer ordinance. So any applicator who wants to seek a variance would be mandated to come go to the EPO, demonstrate that, and then get an agency determination on whether or not the variance standard has been met.
So Commissioner,
But there's nothing
excuse me for a minute.
quantifiable. I guess what I'm getting at is there's nothing quantifiable.
I think this might help a little bit. I know you mentioned during the presentation that there was one variance that actually has been granted over the years, and I'm not sure how many years that has been. But if you could give the board some idea of what that entity or person seeking the variance came forward with that then met the standard that is set forth in our ordinance right now, that might be helpful.
Well, not really why would they
it'll
come
give you
forward for an
It'll give you some indication of what that substantial economic hardship may have been, such that the manager was able to grant that variance.
So from what I understand, that request for the variance was for an applicator to be able to use phosphorus, and this was back after the 2009 ordinance, and since then, we've restricted phosphorus use, so it's a moot point. We wouldn't have someone asking to use phosphorus now because we've already got, if you show a soil test, you can put it down.
I mean, I guess what I'm trying to there's a lot of concern with, at least in my opinion, about on one side how quantifiable the damage is, and on the other side how abstract the variance seems to be, the threshold for the variance. And so, and I understand what you're saying.
But so it doesn't fit in terms of what the variance was granted the last time around. So the question is there a legal requirement that exists for the board to have a variance process, in a sense, in the ordinance?
There is no legal requirement for the fertilizer ordinance to have a variance. Removal of the variance would not touch state law or other opportunities, and it would remove the requirement that a variance seeker come through a process that involves the county.
I got it. Perfect. Got it. Thank you. Sorry, that was like a really long way around. Thank you.